Hello, I want to welcome you to this presentation today. We're here to talk about taking care of yourself as educators during this very challenging time. The Kickapoo Tribal Health Center reached out to us to present a workshop like this because they wanted to get you some extra support as you go through the school year, because they're fully aware that everyone is needing extra support and extra resources right now. And our hope is that this workshop today will give you some of those. Just a few things about us. Maureen Underwood is a licensed clinical social worker who has worked in the field of youth suicide prevention since the 1980s. She's the lead author of the Lifeline Suicide Awareness and Prevention trilogy, which many of you might already be aware of. And for many years, she's worked with communities, schools, and families who are experiencing challenging times, much like the one we're all going through right now. I'm Marney Rohda. I've worked with Maureen since September 11th, when we worked with families who lost someone on that day for about 8 years. As a certified life coach, I am very aware of the importance of remembering to take care of ourselves, especially during hard times. Which brings me to what our goal is today, why we are here, what we hope to accomplish with our workshop. We know that you might be still a little bit weary from last year, and you may have hoped that this year was going to be different than it is so far. We're here today to provide you with some realistic and real-world ways you can take care of yourself, because what we know is this is a marathon and not a sprint. So you can't wait for things to slow down, for life to go back to normal, for things to be easy and calm to take care of yourself. You need to take time to take care of yourself while all of this is happening. And if you take away just one helpful tidbit from today, we are going to call that a success. Our approach today is really simple, just really two main focuses. We're going to talk a bit about the current situation and the climate and the stress that that's causing all of us, but we're not going to go too deeply into that because you're living it. We know you know this because it's your personal experience right now. What we're really here to do is to validate what that feels like and maybe provide a different lens for you to look at it through. And
Marney,
then,
I'm sorry, I was going to add
no, my
something.
friend, go ahead, jump in right now.
Because I wanted to say that, we know that there are lots of resources available for you today about coping with the challenges of current living. Some of them are really great. Some of them are a little trite, and some of them are great ideas that are simply unrealistic for most of us to implement. So we wanted to approach this from a very practical perspective. And I want to echo what Marney just said, is hopefully you'll leave with it just at least one idea that you can use in your real life. Marney?
Thank you, Maureen. And I do want to point out, that we have done other workshops for the Kickapoo Tribal Health Center, and we're just delighted to be able to be back today to provide you with this information. And in support of providing you with that information, what we did was we made a workbook that accompanies today's workshop, and you can use it to follow along with the material we present today. The questions that we talk about during the workshop have prompts in the workbook for you to fill in. And for those of you who are listening to the recording of this presentation today, feel free to pause the recording, to take a couple moments to think about and fill in the workbook as you go. That might be a good way for you to do it. I also want to point out that our hope with this workbook is it serves as a physical reminder for you of what you took away from today, because we know you're very, very busy. And as soon as this workshop is done for you, you're probably going to get caught up in the next thing. And it's very easy when that happens to, even though you had some good ideas or some good plans, to have them be brushed aside because the next thing is pressing and busy and takes your time. But if you have the workbook, it's a way to turn back to and remember, oh, I had that thing I wanted to do. We'll turn to your workbook and take a look at it. So that is our hope with why we made that today, not to give you extra work, but to support your learning so that you can, again, our goal is simple, take away one tidbit, and so you can have that one tidbit written down for yourself. So on that note, getting started with the first item in your workbook, we want to start by having you think about these questions. And Maureen always says, she's been saying it for as long as I've known her, that a problem well-defined is a problem half solved. And this is our start of doing that. Because what I know for sure is that concerns about the current situation are talked about in the media every day. They're talked about in your school community every day. And you hear a lot of different people's concerns and a lot of different angles. And what the goal of this workshop is today is to really turn this on you, your personal concerns, which might not be exactly the same as what everyone else's are. And sometimes you want to make sure you have a boundary between what you're worried about and not quite take on all of the problems. So to that end, go ahead and write down in the workbook, what are 3 top concerns you have about this school year? And because we're aiming for balance, but realistic balance, what is one thing you're looking forward to about this year? And we've asked this question many times, so Maureen's going to share with you some of what we've heard from other educators. Maureen?
Yeah, we do ask this every time we do a training, and we kind of get the same groups of answers. So let's see how these fit with you. One of them of a concern is really about students who missed out on their academic skills last year. So there's going to be a real deficit for them as they come into this year, and they'll be behind grade level, especially, you know that over the summer, often math and English kind of deteriorate. So there's some concern that there's going to be a really big deterioration for a lot of kids in that. Certainly the whether or not the school structure is going to remain in person, is it going to shift again to virtual? Is it going to be hybrid? If it does, how much time do you have to adjust to that? Can your curriculum adjust? Worries about whether I get sick or a family member gets sick, because I think, we often forget that all of you are caregivers. You've got other family members you have to take care of. Your job may be in the school, but you have a job at home too. So that's another issue. And worry about the emotional needs of students. There was a lot of talk about mental health challenges from kids, especially kids who probably needed a mental health consult last year, but were never able to get it, and what that's going to be like to have to deal with them as they come into school this year. Balancing the positive, because we don't want to just stay in that negative place. Some of the things people were looking forward to, believe it or not, was that classroom schedule. We used to think, oh, there's another one of those bells. And it's like, oh, I can't wait to hear those bells again. That your life gets organized according to that. Seeing colleagues on a regular basis, and seeing kids as well. A lot of people were really, really missing that daily interaction. Having lunch in the teacher's room. You may not have thought that having lunch in the teacher's lounge was a lot of fun, but you sure did miss it. And there were a lot of people who talked about teaching their own lessons and not having parents try to do it, so that there was some integrity in what was happening and people were learning what they thought they would learn. And so as a response to all of this, one of the things we know is we've heard a whole lot more about self-care. And as Marnie said, we always give you a definition. So the definition that we want to give you of self-care, because we think this really captures the whole thing, is taking an active role in protecting your own well-being and happiness. And I want to just underscore that word active. This is something that doesn't just happen, you make it happen. It's under your control. You do it deliberately, it's intentional. And really basically what it is, you're taking ownership of taking care of yourself to maintain both your physical health and your emotional well-being. So I just remember that intentional piece. And it's really important to do self-care during times of stress. And I think we all know, we don't have to tell you that right now is one of those roller coasters of stress. For most of us, the high points on this have not been our resources, they've been our stressors. And the low points reflect the fact that we may have felt we just didn't have enough resources, that they're down. Remember that toilet paper shortage we had, or when you went into the grocery store and you saw that most of the shelves were empty? These were practical resources that weren't just necessary for everyday living. And this doesn't even begin to consider some of the stresses you have on your job, because as we know, teaching is a stressful occupation. In one research study, or several, actually, I put several together for this, over 40% of teachers, and we think this applies to everybody who is in a school population and classroom and building, they report feeling high stress in the course of just a typical school year. Comes from having that lack of resources. You all know that at the beginning of the year, those class behavioral problems, parents, pressure related to standardizing testing obligations. And when we looked at all of it, it really showed that teaching ties with nursing as the career with the highest level of stress. You probably are living that, you know that. So what we want to do, we're going back to that definition. We want to define stress for you and then give you some ideas of what to do with it. Stress, the simple definition, it's your body's reaction to a real or perceived demand or threat. And we know it's physiological, it's emotional, it's behavioral. Every part of you that's fed by biology, which is every part of you, responds to stress. You probably learned that when you took your biology 101 course. I mean, that's kind of the impact of stress on our bodies. But I think it's important to recognize that stress means different things to different people. What causes stress in one person may really be not very much concern to somebody else. And as you know, there are some people who are better able to handle stress than others. Sometimes we're not so good at it, but it's also important to recognize that not all stress is bad. Stress can help us do things, accomplish tasks, and actually prevent us from being hurt. For example, you're driving around the road and the person in front of you suddenly slams on their brakes. You feel that blip in your heart and you slam on your brakes too to avoid hitting that car. That's stress being a good indicator for you. And we often consider that as acute stress, that fast stress that happens that you have to respond to very quickly. Our bodies are designed to handle that. As long as it comes in small doses. It's when we have too many doses or we have chronic long-term stress that bad things start to happen. And unfortunately, right now, we are in a period of chronic stress. So Marnie, can you begin to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. So what we've really seen as one of the universal features of this past year and a half is uncertainty. I think you can all think about the fact that life has become pretty uncertain, and that doesn't always feel good. So this is new territory, this land of uncertainty, and it's unfamiliar to us. Some of the uncertain things that we hear people talk about is there's no end in sight. My usual coping and support methods are not in my reach anymore. I can't do the things I used to do that help me feel good. And the future is really unknown and feels very out of my control. I feel less able to affect and cause my future. It feels like things are happening to me as opposed to the fact that I'm being at cause of things. So this uncertainty is contributing to our stress. It's a major component and factor of the stress we're all experiencing right now. And I want you all to take a moment in your workbook to write down some of the things that feel uncertain for you. Again, that defining the problem. What's uncertain for you personally right now, not what you've heard from other people, but what's true for you. And what we do know is the only constant we've been experiencing lately is change. And this change is another really universal feature that's come with our uncertainty. And we've had a lot of it lately, haven't we? More than we might be used to. And for many, I would say most of us, change, even positive change, is really uncomfortable. It adds to our stress because it's uncomfortable. We feel out of our element. We like things to kind of stay the same. Things aren't staying the same anymore, are they? So some of the changes we've heard people talk about are, there's a lot of people who are worried. The general climate of people is worried and negative rather than the opposite. Life as we know it is turned upside down. My regular stuff is not available to me. I don't even know sometimes the rules about what I'm supposed to do or can't do. I'm confused by the rules. That's very disconcerting. And even in our families, where we might have been used to having our families be a space where we, or our friends for some people, where we all kind of are on the same page, there's been so much change. We're not always on the same page as our families or our friends, which can also be difficult. So once again, just turn to your workbook and write down some of the changes that you have affected you personally that you're aware of that are adding to your stress right now. And the final aspect of stress that I want to talk about that I think has really been highlighted in the past year and a half or so are our concerns about others. What we know based on your profession in education, in working with children, is that you often think about others before yourself, much more than people in other professions do. So for a lot of you, this is a big one. You can't even separate, maybe when we ask you what your concerns about going back to school are, you might have listed all concerns about your students, no concerns about you, which is okay. That's in fitting with your profession. You're often thinking, are my students okay? Is my family okay? Is my community okay? Is the world okay? The list goes on, right? Of your concerns for others. And because it does contribute so much to your feeling of stress, we don't want to leave this out. We want you to go ahead in your workbook and fill in what some of those concerns you have about others are. And what you'll notice now that we've had you kind of fill in these 3 different aspects of stress is there probably are some parallels with those concerns you wrote about early on. Those first 3 concerns you're worried about, you're going to see some parallels here. Maybe it's a perfect match. Maybe it's not a perfect match. But my guess is that a lot of these things that we've asked you to fill in, concerns about others, concerns about change, and concerns about uncertainty, fit in with your major concerns for this year. So what Maureen's going to do now is talk to you about, since we've kind of talked about all these stressful things, and I'm feeling a little bit more stressed than I was when I started talking to you guys, she's going to talk about what, the very fact that I'm more stressed, that stress can lead to burnout. Maureen?
And we thought about, defining burnout, and we thought about probably the easiest way to define it is to talk about how it shows itself in our behavior and our thinking. So let me go through this list very quickly and just listen and see if some of these sound like you. Do you dread the next day of work? Do you find yourself looking forward to Friday on Monday or maybe on Sunday? Do you have to bite your tongue to avoid saying something mean? Usually we do this more with colleagues than we do with family members. But even if you're biting your tongue, do you have those mean thoughts anyway? Are you thinking about a new career? Counting the days till you get a vacation? Or do you have a hard time getting out of the door in the morning? Sure, all of us have 1 or 2 of these things at some time or another. But it's when you have them every day that burnout might be in the air. I know for me as a social worker, when I think about going to work in the garden department at Home Depot, I kind of know I'm getting sort of close to the edge. And we all have burnout barometers. So it's important to think about, what are yours? What are the things that tell you when you may be having just a little bit too much stress, and what are you going to do about it? So let's move from here to talk about coping, because we think that obviously that's where it is. We want to give you, and as I said earlier, we want to give you simple tools to manage what seems like inevitable stress these days. And also, in order to do that, we want to start out by correcting a common misconception about self-care, where it's seen as somehow being self-indulgent. Remember, self-care is the focus you put on taking care of yourself so you can take care of others. It's that analogy of putting on your oxygen mask first if you're on an airplane. And people often confuse self-indulgence with self-care. Self-indulgence does have a bad reputation, and it's often just a shorthand for overdoing something. Overeating, as you can see, this woman has her mouth stuffed with French fries. Sugar is often one of those overindulgent. You heard about my M&Ms. I sometimes think they're going to change the name of the company to my name because I've eaten so many M&Ms, but over drinking, overdoing anything that creates more problems than it fixes. And this is often a stress reaction that's automatic. We just find ourselves doing it. You just find yourself putting things into your mouth. So what we're going to talk about are some of those intentional strategies that you can use to practice self-care. So the first thing is recognizing we're not alone in this, and you're not alone. Yes, some of the responsibilities we just talked about, they may be yours personally, nobody else has them, but every one of the people you work with in your building or every person in your own home has their own set of responsibilities. Everybody gets their share. And it may not seem this way sometimes, but everybody has a burden, especially now. And it's really important to use our community, not just for comparison, for support. Sometimes the way we talk about others is we look at others and we're envious. Oh, they have it so much easier. They're not going through what I'm going through. And that gets us always in a bad place, doesn't it? So it's really important to not go to that place of comparison, but to look at the fact that our communities can be there for support, which is kind of what we're going to talk about next. Marnie?
Great. So that being said, what's really important is to reestablish some connections and really use your community. Now, some of you have your community you go to all the time, and you've gone to that community for the last year and a half. And you might, when you look back, notice that in the last year and a half, you've become a little bit more isolated for various reasons, and you might want to venture out a little bit wider. So here's a simple example. The Kickapoo Tribal Health Center is your community, and they've reached out to us to provide you with this workshop. So that is a way of community expanding. So we are not physically located in Oklahoma, and the Kickapoo Tribal Health Center reached out to us to do this, to enlarge your community. And in some ways, Maureen and I are now part of your community when it comes to self-care. And so it's really a matter of looking around and seeing where you can rely on your community and where you might need to reestablish some connections. And the places to look are family and colleagues. Those are probably your go-to, your neighborhood, your cultural community, your hobbies and interests. That's a community, the community of people who like the same thing, whether it's fishing or whether it's knitting. That's a community of people and hobbies. And then I don't want to omit the larger world, which is really that online community that you have access to, of interest groups, of professional groups. Educators are a strong national organization of which you are part of. And that is a place to go to. I know lots of teachers use teacher listservs to ask questions and get ideas for challenging situations. That is a very important aspect of what will help you take care of yourself better right now, is leaning into people and knowing that you're not alone, right? That's the principal idea. And the other thing we want to mention here about community and relationships is your relationship with yourself. Sometimes we can get so busy building positive relationships with other people, with students, with colleagues, with parents, that we stop and we forget to recognize that giving attention to building a positive relationship with yourself is as important. And here's the good news. You may be thinking, wait, how do I do that? How do I build a relationship with myself? Well, self-care is one of the primary ways that we build relationship with ourselves. It is something that we do because we basically listen to our own needs and then find ways to fill them through self-care. So that self-care is going to go a long way to help you build that relationship with yourself. And that moves us from our relationship and community part of self-care to the next part of self-care, which is really integrating support, control, and structure into your days. Now, remember I talked about how there's so much uncertainty and change right now, and uncertainty and change kind of by definition undermine our sense of support, control, and structure. And support and control and structure are what helps us feel kind of solid. It gives us that firm foundation to stand on. And when there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, we can start to feel a little bit unsettled and unmoored. So support and control or structure are important, and they're important things to intentionally, like Maureen mentioned, integrate for yourself. We can't wait for the world right now to give us support, control, structure. If we wanted to wait and say, when everything's figured out, when everything is solved and figured out, then I'll feel good. Well, that's going to be a lot of months maybe of not feeling good. So let's talk about giving it to yourself so you don't need to wait for the world to give it to you. Take a look at our tree here. So this tree to me is a big, beautiful old tree. And when he has his leaves on, I bet he's completely majestic. But right now, do you notice how in order to survive, he has a lot of support in place? Now he's still going to have leaves that are all of his own creation, but he has all these supports to hold his branches. And that's really the way I see the way we need support. Support isn't, I can't do it, I can't be myself on my own. It is more like I'm going to be a fuller expression of myself when I lean into support that's around me. And a lot of us like to do it on our own and be independent and not ask for help. That can be comfortable. So support, I'd like to redefine as not so much asking for help, but more like letting your community build you up. So there's an activity in your workshop in your workbook about support. What I want to say is that you want to look widely for support, and you can do this activity where you're identifying, here's a person in my family who supports me, here's a person in my friends who support me. Support doesn't have to be people. So in the workbook, it's asking you, how does your faith support you? How does your culture support you? How do your belief system support you? So remember that when you're looking for support, it's not just people, it's also your way of being, the way you experience the world, and the way you live in the world. So that's support. And moving on to control. So here's the thing. Right now, we might feel very much out of control, that life is happening to us. We're not really creating our life. And it's important to recognize that even though that might be true in some places of your life, it's good to recognize where you do have control, where you do get to make decisions and have say in what happens. So a way to look at that is to just kind of draw a diagram where in the inside of the circle are things you can control. So I took a stab at some things. These are very generic. When you do this for yourself in the workshop, in the workbook, I'd like to think it was a little bit more specific, but things you can control are taking care of yourself. That's at self-care we're talking about. Asking for help, your attitude, how you respond and adapt. And things outside of your control, which I think is very hard for some of us to accept, even things like the weather, outside of your control. Local and district mandates, outside of your control. How other people feel about returning to school. Parents' expectations. But let's just lay it out. Everybody else's in the world's expectations, completely out of your control. And when you separate out what you can control, what you can't control, the idea here is then to put your energy, because energy is limited. You don't have unlimited energy. You can't pour your energy at all of these things. But if you can, like a laser beam, devote your energy and your thoughts and your efforts to things you can control, you're much more likely to be effective. And also, you've reduced your stress because you've stopped putting energy on those things that you can't control. And the final part of our little 3 magic words of support, control, and structure is structure, and making structure work for you. You know, Maureen already talked about the comfort of the school day and the schedule that's built into that. And, you know, making a schedule and making to-do lists is one of the ways we talk about structure. Where can you find structure? Looking around your life, right? The school days Maureen mentioned, your own schedule, right? Because you are not just a teacher. The school has the schedule for you, but you get to control what you do in the morning and what you do in the afternoon. Now, I'm just going to be very transparent here and say that I know a lot of you feel like you can't control what you do outside of work because you have kids' schedules and you have doctor's appointments and sports games and driving. So it might not be that you have the entire time before and after school where you're in control of the schedule. That also might be coming down to you from on high, so to speak. But there are bits of time, right? Bits of time before and after and between things where you have a little bit of control. And the other thing that gives you a lot of structure are boundaries, right? So boundaries are what you do and what you don't do, what you choose to let people ask of you and what you say no to. Here's where I'm going to say no. That's a boundary. And what I will say that especially during high stress times, but honestly, always being able to create those no boundaries and saying, that's where I stop. I care about people, I care about others, but this is a no for me because I need to do it doesn't fit in the schedule. And I think Maureen is going to talk about this whole idea of what fits in the schedule and what doesn't, about making structure work for you.
Yeah, thanks, Marnie. I mean, especially I want to talk about in relation to your job in the school. Streamlining your schedule means you can do fewer things better. How do you do that? Well, you can keep track of your time and see where your energy drains are. Do you spend too much time grading assignments? Could you assign more reading and fewer papers? Could you channel individual student effort into group projects so you only have one grade for 10 kids as opposed to 10 individual grades? Could you actually put rest time in your daily schedule? One suggestion is to turn out the lights in your classroom after dismissal and just sit quietly for 3 minutes. It's not a lot of time. Set certain times during the day when you check your email and your text, not every 5 minutes. And you have to stick to that schedule because I'll tell you, people will get mad at you. I'm one of those people who really does do that. And what I find is people get angry because I'm making my time my own. You want to cut down on multitasking. Believe it or not, the human brain does not do well when it's pulled in multiple directions at the same time. Fewer things at once actually get done better. And you may be a champ at multitasking, but I encourage you to give it a try to drop off a few of those things. Also, pairing a habit that's a routine with a new self-care habit can help integrate it and make it part of your schedule. So for example, you have to drive to school every day, right? You got to get there. So that's your routine. Suppose you pair that with listening to your favorite music or listening to a book on tape. You have to carpool with the kids. You got to take the kids to school. Well, suppose you leave 5 minutes earlier and you can get a Starbucks run in. So you can get some coffee on the way. Eat your lunch and read a cheesy novel or a cheesy magazine. If you do the same thing every time, it reprograms your brain and it gives you something to look forward to. I used to have, for example, a 15-minute commute from my office to home. And so what I would do is I listened to books on tape. So at the end of the day, I actually looked forward to getting into my car so I could read the next chapter in my book. So again, those are some ways to make structure work for you. We want to talk about now the third step, which is striving for quality time and quality self-care as opposed to quantity. And Marnie, I think you're going to give us some suggestions about this.
I am. And you know what, Maureen, as we're going through this workshop right now, what I notice is two things I just want to point out as overarching themes. In case anyone's waiting for the time where we tell them that a good self-care technique is a bathtub, as a bath, or a massage, you're not going to hear that today. Now, that's not because we think those are bad things. They're not at all bad things, but we do think they defy the rule of quantity and quality. They take a lot of time, and I'm not always sure if you're getting the same bang for the buck for them as you might want to get. And the other thing I just want to point out when Maureen talked about reading a cheesy novel or a cheesy magazine, We also don't think self-care translates into what people will tell you are good for you. So sometimes, right, M&Ms or a cheesy novel, they count as self-care. Sometimes I think we combine self-care with healthy life lengthening behavior. And what I'm going to say is, can we separate those a little bit? Yes, we know we need to do those things, some amount of those healthy things, but we do not conflate them today with self-care. And so I just wanted to point out those two overarching themes in case you were waiting for us to tell you that you need to eat more vegetables, etc. That's not going to be part of what we have today. Which brings me to the mini mental vacation. So again, quantity, short, quality, high, right? A mini mental vacation, when I say mini, I mean a minute, I mean maybe 2 minutes. And the idea here is you let yourself go to a place that feels, and then you fill in the blank. What do you need? It feels restful, it feels peaceful, it feels comforting, or maybe it feels rejuvenating and exciting and causes you to experience a lot of joy, right? You get to fill in the blank of what it is you want to, what you need that vacation to fill up, but it could be any of those things. So some ideas in case you're like, well, what do you mean, Marnie? So you could be playing, your mini mental vacation could be imagining yourself playing in your backyard with your dog. Or it could be imagine yourself reading a book in bed. You can imagine yourself watching a beautiful sunset on a kayak on a quiet lake, or having just climbed a huge mountain and enjoying the view. Or like probably mine is sitting on a beach with my toes in the sand, enjoying the warm sun and maybe a book, but maybe just looking at the waves. So those mini mental vacations, the key to making them work for you and actually cause that stress reduction is engaging your senses. So it's not just kind of thinking about it, it's really bringing yourself there, transporting yourself to that place where you can see the vision, you can smell the air, I can smell the salt air, I can hear the waves, and I can see, so I can see I can see it, I can feel it, I can hear it, I'm really there. And so this is just something that you can do many times throughout the day. It doesn't have to be just when things get really bad. It could become a regular routine that you do, or it could be something that you do every morning to start the day. Just let yourself go somewhere that's quiet and calm or peaceful or happy for you and take a break. The other thing I want to mention about this is if you happen to work in a classroom and you are feeling the need for a mental vacation, your students want one too. It's probably very typical that if you need a break, they need a break too. And this can become a really great classroom activity. Talking to your students about the kinds of using their imagination. This is really using your imagination to help your body. And that's something you can do in the classroom. So you'll see in your workbook, I have a space there for you to fill out where your mini mental vacation place is. You don't have to have only one. You can have many, or you might just have one that is always super comforting. A lot of times it's a place in your past that was full of happy memories, but it could be somewhere you've never been as well. The next thing I want to talk about when it comes to these very high quality, don't take a lot of time breaks is coming up for air. So the way I want you to think about coming up for air is looking at my swimmer right here. My swimmer needs a breath. He's working hard. He does not get out of the pool to take a breath. He keeps swimming and he turns his head slightly to the side. He exhales, he inhales, and then he keeps swimming. So that is honestly for educators about a realistic amount of time you have for a break, right? You don't have time to get out of the pool. You have to just kind of exhale, inhale, and keep going. So that's why I call these micro breaks. They're really even shorter than that mini mental vacation probably. But like the mini mental vacation, they often engage the senses. What you want to do is just turn your attention, look out the window, have a mint or a piece of chocolate, touch something that's soft, smooth, or cool. Maybe you have a stone on your desk. Maybe you have a stuffed animal, right? Touch something that engages your senses. You could listen to a song that inspires you or gives you the mood that you're looking for. And also you can take a deep breath of a favorite smell, whether that's from an essential oil or something that you have handy around you. It could again be that bag of chocolate. So you're engaging the senses to get that micro break. And another way to do it, if engaging the senses doesn't work for you, is just change what you're doing. If you need to come up for air and you've been sitting, stand up. If you've been standing, sit down or move to a different place of your room. Change your physical location or your physical way of where you are. That immediately engages your brain and causes you to have a bit of relaxation. These are things you can do anytime, anywhere. They're completely portable and they're often invisible to the people around you. No one needs to know. You're not holding up a big sign that says taking a break, right? You can do it in the middle of a meeting. You can do it in the middle of a conversation with someone, probably even, right? I'm talking to you and then I stand up. You don't notice that I'm taking a break, but I know I need to have one of these micro breaks. Again, though, like I said, with the mini mental vacation, you can make it a group effort. And this is something, again, you can do with your classroom. When you need to come up for air, your students probably do too. Another easy to use and giving you high bang for your buck self-care tip is having a personal emergency self-care kit. And the reason why we suggest this is because when you need a break, we know your resources are down. When your resources are down, trying to think of what would help you feel better is hard. This is kind of like when you're hungry and someone asks you what you want to eat and you're too hungry to even name you don't know. Either nothing sounds good or everything sounds good. You don't know what to do. You're too hungry to figure out what to eat. The same thing happens when we need self-care. Our resources are so low, we can't even think of the thing. But if you have an emergency kit, right, you're good. Now, to be clear with the logistics of this could be just a virtual kit, like a file, a computer file or a file on your phone that has a bunch of stuff on it. Pictures you like, places you want to go, things that inspire you, things that make you laugh. I really can't overemphasize laughter as a really great self-care technique. I think a lot of us, especially when we were spending less time with people, forgot how good laughing feels. And so things that make you laugh would be a good thing for that. So that could be on your computer or on your phone, and you can just click a tab and you have pop up a bunch of stuff. Or you could go old school and have a physical file. That's completely allowed too. And if you have a physical file, you can include some more things like scented oils, favorite snacks, as a reward, treat, or bribe. I don't care the language that you use for this. Sometimes when it's, in case of emergency, break glass, and what you need in that break glass is something delicious that makes you feel good, right? That's a thing. It's appropriate. So that could be in there. And I want to point out for you guys on these self-care kits, just a suggestion. This is something that maybe as a school community, you go ahead and make some of these and put them in your teacher's lounge. Wouldn't that be handy to have a couple of these kits? And they could be reusable. It wouldn't have to be one and done, but it could be things that in general make you all feel happier or more comforted and that you might need on a break. So just a suggestion about something that might be handy. And the last thing I want to say might feel a little controversial, because if you look at any self-care tips, one of the things they tell you is put your phone down, use your phone less. It's disrupting your sleep pattern. Make sure you don't use your phone before bed. There's a lot of things. And I don't disagree with that. There's actual science involved in that. And I'm all for science and I believe in that. What I'm going to say is that sometimes when we are looking for a quick burst of self-care where we're getting something with very little effort and very little time, your phone is a very handy device to get something quickly. So again, you could have had that emergency self-care file on your phone, but other ways you can use your phone if you don't want to make a whole file is just, you need a break. Watch a funny video. Don't lose 45 minutes on TikTok. Watch one funny video, right? Look at a photo of someone you care about or someplace you love going, a favorite memory, a recent memory or a far gone memory, either one. Those are really good things. Another thing you can use your phone for is sending a just because text to someone to let them know you appreciate them and why, or you were thinking about them and why. Because what we know is that sometimes when our resources feel depleted, reaching out to somebody else, again, that's that reestablishing connection with the community, reaching out to someone else, doing something helpful for somebody else, saying something nice helps fill up our tank too. So that brings me to the end of the simple things that don't take a lot of time, but give you a lot of bang for the buck. And when it comes to self-care, and Maureen's going to finish up with using your brain to help your body. Maureen, what does that even mean?
Well, as I'm listening to you talk, Marnie, it's so clear to me that a lot of things that you're saying really do engage your brain and give you bursts of hormones and neurotransmitters that counteract some of the negative effects of stress. Because as we've talked about, your brain reacts to stress in usually a way that impairs our functioning. We have less patience, less flexibility. Sometimes we're more impulsive. Our problem solving is not so great. So what we want to do, and you'll see this on our next slide, is just kind of give you a sense of how you can harness the energy in your brain to actually counteract some of the impact of stress. And we're going to go through these 4 different hormones: mood stabilizer, painkiller, rewards. So let's look at each of these individually and tie them back to things we've already talked about before. So you can see how we're not just talking about, these random things and you have this random feeling of feeling good. Your brain chemistry actually changes you physiologically. And oxytocin is something that actually decreases that stress hormone cortisol that gets released in our brain. And the easiest ways to get this are something like holding hands. Having that physical sensation with someone, holding that snuggly animal or wearing that piece of clothing. There's a reason we always like those cuddly blankets and those, sort of fleece sweaters. That gives us some serotonin. As Marnie said before, if you give a small compliment, you feel better, and the person who gets it feel better. So there's a mutual exchange of oxytocin just with a small compliment. And finally, I saved the dog for last because pets, I just think they're the best boosters in the world. Certainly petting a dog, you get some degree of oxytocin, but in looking at the research on this, I was fascinated to find out that you can actually get some oxytocin from watching fish in an aquarium. Who knew? And I think about how many classrooms I've been in my life where there was a fish tank. And I bet if you're one of those people who's got a fish tank, you didn't think about the fact that this was a stress reducer. It's either watching those fish, kind of do their balletic swimming around each other, or sometimes the fish eating each other. Whatever it is, there's something about that releases oxytocin. So good for you if you've got that animal in your classroom. The second thing we want to take a look at is dopamine, which you probably heard of. This is the reward chemical. Certainly accomplishing something gives you a dose of dopamine, and it doesn't have to be a marathon. This is where, when Marnie talked about earlier, having, making like a checklist, just checking something off the list can give you a shot of dopamine. And if you set things up intentionally as accomplishments, all kinds of things throughout the course of your day can give you shots of dopamine. For example, if I have it in my mind that it's an accomplishment if I get up before the alarm goes off, I get a release of dopamine first thing in the morning when I wake up. Eating. Yes, we've talked about healthy foods, but there's a reason that some of those high carb foods like mac and cheese or fry bread, they taste so good and they give us comfort because they trigger dopamine release. We know that exercise and meditation, you see that first person there. The second one is the picture of the guy who's taking a rest and combining it with his pet. So he's doing both a little oxytocin and a little dopamine together. And the other thing we don't have on here, but I just want to point out to you, what gives you more dopamine release than almost any form of exercise is dancing. Even if you're not good at it, you can do it alone and you're going to get a chunk of dopamine release from just dancing yourself around. So those of you who do it now, good on you. And the rest of us, we got to catch up with you. Serotonin, we hear lots about serotonin as a mood stabilizer. And yes, meditation, quieting yourself can work, but you can also get it from working out, like swimming. Being in nature, especially with groups of people that you like, you get the impact of nature and the synergy of the group. But if you're not a group person, and there's some of us who aren't, just being out in the sunshine can give us some serotonin. So doing it by yourself can give you serotonin. And finally, endorphins, which we know are painkillers. And I want you to think for a second, because what we know is the opposite of pain is pleasure. So things that give you pleasure trigger endorphins. So exercise, it doesn't have to be cross training or ninja training. You see this guy at the top just sort of, doing some little rubber band things. That works. As Marnie mentioned before, some of those smells of essential oils, like especially lavender, peppermint, rosemary. This is my favorite, of course, eating chocolate, dark chocolate. In particular, sets off endorphins in your brain. And as Marnie said before, laughing. There's lots of research about the benefits of laughing, especially the research primarily has been done. The most solid research is people with life-threatening illnesses. And if it can help somebody who's got a life-threatening illness, it sure can help us in our everyday. So what do you need to keep going? Well, first of all, you have to take the first step, and that's an inventory of what you've got and what you need for a successful school year. And it's obviously about more than school supplies, especially this year. We know it's going to take a lot of energy, especially at the beginning of school, and if you have those schedule changes where you go from virtual to hybrid or whatever. And when something takes a lot of energy, we often struggle to keep in balance. So you're going to have to try to pace yourself and stay in balance. And in order to do that, the skill that you need the most is flexibility. We've practiced it a lot in the pandemic. If you were to go back and look over the last year and a half, you've had to be flexible more times than you could count. And a rule of thumb, because we're talking about all the scheduling and how helpful it is, needs always triumph schedules. So you need more flexibility, more creativity in thinking when people seem to be falling apart. And schedules shouldn't rule your life. When there are more needs, you got to be more flexible. The best example I could think about is when you're taking your kids on a trip somewhere and you're supposed to get there at a designated time. And how many kids you got in the cars, how many times this happened, no matter where you're going and the rules you put ahead of time, there's always somebody who has to go to the bathroom, right? And there's never a bathroom right on the route. So you got to take yourself off the road. You got to go take someplace else. Your schedule's out the window because the need that somebody has for a bathroom trumps that schedule. So just remember that there's nothing you can do about it. That's just kind of the way it is. And you have to go along with that. And finally, as Marnie said, you want to find out where your support systems are. Who can you get angry with? Who can you bitch to? Who lets you cry on their shoulder? Who makes you laugh? And you want to intentionally reach out to these folks. There's that intention again. So it's important, if you just do it with intention, it releases all of those biochemicals in your brain and you get more bang for your buck. So at the end of the day, what we want to leave you with is the idea that you have to make time for self-care. It doesn't take a lot of time. Think about those mini breaks Marnie talked to you about. This isn't like you need time to go to a spa or get a massage or take a long hot bath. That would be nice, but it doesn't take a lot of time. And the fact that we've given you some ideas about it, we hope you can think of this differently. And we want you to look at the fact that when you look at your schedule, you look at what you've got programmed, how much of the day is time for you? Most of us have less than 30 minutes, and that's usually early in the morning before anybody else gets up in our house, or late at night after everybody goes to bed. And the question we want you to ask is, where do you fit in your daily schedule? Marnie, what do you want to add to that?
Well, Maureen, I think that's really great. And I think what I want to add is going back to what I said early on, which is our goal is to have you have one tip to take away. And because we know you're busy, and because, as Maureen just said, most people only have 30 minutes for themselves. And so we don't think you're going to get 3 hours for yourself. We'd like you to get 35 minutes for yourself. The shift we're looking at is that small, 35 minutes for yourself, one new thing to do. And so to help you kind of come up with that last question in the workbook, which is one thing that you want to take away and try right away, just want to recap where we've been and where we ended up. So we started out talking self-care when we talked about reconnecting with your community and your connections with people, as well as your relationship with yourself. That's a place to look for something you could do. Another place to look for something to do is having more support, control, and structure. That's the kind that you put into your world, not that you rely on from the outside world. So that might be a place you want to look to add something for yourself. Another place is those quick and easy ones I talked about, the mini mental vacation, coming up for air, the emergency kit, or using your phone. Those are quick and easy ones. That might be what appeals to you to start trying right away. And then the last thing, which really does honestly tie into almost not everything else we talked about, and it just gives you a different context for it, and maybe this feels better and more approachable for you, is how to use your brain to help your body. And is there one of those brain chemicals that you want to engage more often using one of those techniques that Maureen talked about? It's as simple as that. So take a moment to think about that and go ahead and write in your workbook one thing you want to try right away. And again, the idea of this is because if you don't think of it now, the day is going to get ahead of you, and you're going to complete one day, a couple of weeks from now, you'll think to yourself, oh yeah, that workshop, there were some good ideas in that work. I don't remember what they were, right? So our goal is to have you just take that one that maybe you can take with you through the school year, and that makes a difference in your year. So that brings us to the end. What we really want to say here is we are so grateful for the work of educators and what you do for children. It is a labor of love, and it's very challenging, and we know that, and we're so grateful for each one of you that you selected this career and you are there for our children. And we want to also thank the Kickapoo Tribal Health Center for knowing that and acknowledging that about you and wanting to be there for you and giving us the opportunity to talk to you. Maureen, did you want to say goodbye?
I want to say have a great school year.
Absolutely. Have a great school year. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.